In this video, we're going to make a woven bracelet. So let's get started. In all honesty, I have only done this 2 other times and it was about 5 years ago now. And so I thought it was time to do another woven bracelet, and we're gonna probably have to do some learning together at this point. The yarn I'm using today is Briggs & Little Heritage yarn. This is the same yarn I used in a recent mug rug project, and I'm really loving it, so I wanted to try it with a bracelet as well. And then I'm also going to be using yellow 4/8 cotton. I'm gonna be starting my bracelet with the yellow color, so I just wanted my weft and warp to kind of match, just so that they blend in a little bit better together. To end my bracelet, I am going to be using these, I believe they're called ribbon clamps. So I think you can grab these anywhere that sells jewelry making supplies, so a craft store or online or whatever. I have these 2 gold ones, and I will measure them for you, just if you're curious. Oh, that's a weird measurement. They're 7/8 of an inch wide, or about 2 centimeters wide. Now, I want to make sure that my warp is going to be the same width as this. I know that for me, that's going to be 8 warp strings, double warped. So I'm just tying an overhand knot into my warp string to create a loop. I'm going to cut off the excess so it's out of my way. And I'm gonna get started with warping. So I'm gonna put a total of 8 strings on here, but they are going to be double warped. So that means once I get back up here, I'm putting 2 strings between each of the pegs or notches or whatever you want to say. 2 strings in each notch. And I have this a little bit off centered, but that is okay. So 2, 4, 6, 7, and this is the 8th one. So now that I have my 8 warp strings, I'm gonna go ahead and cut off this string, but leave a nice long tail. And then I'm just gonna tie a knot, and I'm making this look so much more awkward than it feels usually. So I'm knotting it at the other end so that it's all secured on the loom. And I do like to triple knot it because I just get a little bit paranoid. All right, so now I can cut off this excess as well. And I'm gonna tape down my loom so that it doesn't slide around, just with some painter's tape. And now we can get started with weaving. The next thing that you're gonna wanna do is, if you're making this bracelet for yourself, you're gonna wanna measure your wrist. So for me, my wrist, without it being too tight, is about 6 inches around. Now I wanna make sure that my bracelet is actually less than that, the woven part specifically, because I'm also gonna have the ends of these. Now this will be clamped around the actual bracelet, so it's not gonna add that much length, but what will add length is the additional pieces that we have to put on. So we have to put on a clasp as well as some jump rings. So that's gonna add some width. So I'm gonna be aiming for my bracelet to be actually only 5 inches. And then what I can do is actually add more jump rings or even some chain. You can decide what you would like to do, but you can add some jump rings or chain in between to make it the right length. And now I am second guessing myself if I want this only 5 inches. So if I do that, I'm gonna just line these things up to see how much width I think that's gonna add. So that's gonna be there, that'll be on there. And then we'll need another one of these here, and then that'll be attached there. So actually that does look like it's gonna be about 1 inch. So that will give me my 6 inches. And I can always add another jump ring just so it's a little bit looser. But personally, and it depends how you like to wear your bracelets, but I don't like bracelets or watches or things to be too loose because I don't like when they kind of ride up. So this is gonna be really personal preference. And the first color I'm going to grab is my yellow. So I'm gonna be starting and ending with the yellow because it's gonna just kind of blend in a little bit better. And I'm gonna grab, I think, just 1 arm's length to start with. So then I'm gonna just look at what 5 inches looks like on here. And I'm just gonna start my bracelet right about here. This isn't a big deal. I'm gonna show you a trick for how you can finish this off. I've done it once before and it worked, so I'm hoping it'll work again. So I'm gonna start with over 1, under 1 plain weave, just like so. And then we're gonna do a twining stitch on top of this. This is just gonna help secure things at the bottom and the top a little bit more. So I'm gonna show you a quick demonstration on how to do twining stitch, but if you need a more in-depth tutorial, I'll link one right here. So everywhere that the weft, which is our horizontal string, is going over top of the warp, which is our vertical string, we need to grab that with our tapestry needle. And we're gonna be grabbing it at an angle. Now, it doesn't really matter if you point your needle up, if you point your needle down or you point your needle up, but whatever you choose, just make sure you do that on each stitch. For this sake, I'm gonna do what I typically do, which is go down. So on the first warp string, the weft is going under. So we're gonna skip to the next one. And then I'm grabbing both the warp string and the weft string, going underneath both at an angle. We want this tail, so make sure you don't pull too hard here. And we're just gonna go ahead and tighten this up, and it'll be easier to tighten up once we do the next one. So we can skip the next warp string because that's the one where the warp string is going over the weft, and we're going to the next one after that where the weft is going over the warp. So we're grabbing it again at an angle, and this is where we can start kind of tightening things up. You don't want to ream on it, but you can see that what it does is it really nicely and evenly spreads out your warp strings. So I can skip the next warp string, go to the one after that, going under both the warp and the weft, tightening it up, and then I have one more. Now this one isn't gonna be quite the same, but I'm still gonna go underneath both. And that's how we start. Next, I'm going to do 2 rows of over 1, under 1 plain weave. This is just gonna add to the structural integrity of the ends. And we can go ahead and grab our clasp and make sure that that's gonna fit nicely. Now it looks like I can actually pull this in just a hair more so that the clamp will actually fit fully around this, and that's looking pretty good to me there. So I'm gonna do 1 more row with over 1, under 1. And I'm squishing it down nice and tight. And that looks good to me there. So now for the rest of the bracelet weaving part, aside from the other end, I'm going to be weaving over 2, under 2. And I want this to be similar to, actually, I'll just grab it so I can show you. So we're doing something similar to this little mug rug that I made a couple videos ago. And basically we want to not see the warp string. So that's why I started it the same here, where we have over 1, under 1, just for the structure. And now we're going over 2, under 2, so that we're not seeing the warp strings at all throughout the rest of the bracelet. So I'm gonna go ahead and go over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2, and back the other way. Over, under, over, under. So the way that my bracelet is going to go is it's going to be split up in 1/2 inch and 1 inch stripes, essentially. Was it 1 inch? Yes. So all of my 1/2 inch stripes are going to be yellow, and then I'm gonna do 1 inch stripes of the red and the blue in between that. So you'll get a sense of what I mean by that as I go. But for now, I'm just gonna keep weaving until I get to 1/2 inch. Now I'm almost there. It's only gonna be a few more rows, and then we'll switch colors. Don't forget that even on a small bracelet, you still want to have a little bit of an arch or an angle up so that you're not sucking in the sides of your bracelet too much. But I am going to be beating down this weft pretty firmly because, again, I don't want to see the warp strings at the end. So I'll grab my measuring tape, measure again. Maybe I can do 1 more row. Okay, so that looks great to me there. Now, since I'm ending going underneath the warp strings, what I like to do is actually lift this up, and then I'm gonna loop my weft back around those last 2 warp strings just to give a tidier finish, and it just seems to work well for me, so I'm gonna do it. Now I'm gonna leave, you know, about 4 or so inches, a little bit more, for a tail so that I can tuck that in later, and now I can move on to my next color. Now, since I'm going to be using this yellow again, I'm gonna keep it on that needle since I have a second needle, and now I'll move on to the next color. For me, that's going to be this burgundy color, and once again, I'm just gonna grab about an arm's length. And then after I weave this inch, I'll have a better idea how much I need for the rest of the stripes. So I'm just gonna keep weaving over 2, under 2 until I get to 1 inch. Okay, I think I already changed my mind about the order of the colors, which is totally fine. I can do that. I'm gonna go to the blue next for the next 1/2 inch section. I kind of want the blue to touch the red because I think it'll be really pretty. So I'm gonna just go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna grab, let's see, how much did I use here? Let's have a look. Gonna leave a tail. And now I should have a pretty good idea. Okay, so I used about 1/2 of an arm's length. I'm just gonna grab another arm's length. I definitely err on the side of a little bit too much than not enough, because it's just very frustrating when you weave for a while and then you get to a point where you're like, I just don't have enough. So, and not to mention that even amongst the same yarn, but different colors, the thickness can vary slightly. So I'm gonna go with a little bit extra. Should I have gone with this blue? I think I should have. I am so indecisive today. We're going with a brighter blue. So this section is just gonna be a 1/2 inch, and then the next one will be 1 inch. Something that happens if you have one yarn in too many colors, it can be really difficult to actually pick colors to work with. And that's what's been happening for me today. There are so many colors and they're all so beautiful that it's hard to decide which ones to use for which project. Okay, in an effort to keep this interesting, I'm not gonna do a symmetrical bracelet with the colors. So I'm gonna take that bit off there. And next, I'm actually gonna go back to the red. So the red will now be a little 1/2 inch section. So I'm just, even though I'm using the same 3 colors, I'm kind of mixing up the order just so that it doesn't look, I don't know, I just wanted to try something that was a little bit less symmetrical in the way that the colors were throughout. So it'll be a 1/2 inch bit of the red and then a 1 inch section of the blue, and then finishing it off with the yellow. So to finish this off, I'm gonna do it the same way that I started. Now I'm gonna double check that I will end up at 5 inches, and it looks like I will. So what I'm gonna do is go back down to here and count how many rows of the over 2, under 2 I did, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have 6 rows of the over 2, under 2, then I'll do 2 rows of over 1, under 1, and then the last row will be that twining stitch. If you've watched my channel for a while, you know that I'll always tell you when you go to do your twining stitch to cut off your main piece of yarn and start again at the other side, or else it can kind of suck in your warp. But this is such a small warp that I'm going to try just turning around, because I think it'll work again on such a small warp. So this time I'm going from right to left. I'm just gonna have to be really careful on how I tighten it. So I'm not gonna be pulling on it too much. It might not have as much staying power, but it's in the end not gonna matter because that's where the clamp is going anyway. So I'm gonna be careful. And look, that worked just fine. So that's good news. Now I'm gonna measure that this is actually about that 1/2 inch. I can probably push that back up just a hair so that I have my 5 inches. Now we need to tuck in all the ends. I'm gonna cut off this. I'm gonna grab a smaller needle. So this is just a little yarn needle from the craft store. Most places that sell yarn will sell some sort of yarn needle. It's like, sometimes it's called a darning needle, sometimes it's called a yarn needle, but they're really helpful for tucking in ends on pieces like this where everything's really tight together. So I'm just flipping my loom over and I'm gonna make sure all the ends are in the back. So I'm just pulling them all out so I don't miss any of them. And then I'm going to thread my needle. There's quite a lot of ends to tuck in on this, so hopefully it won't be too bad. And I'm just gonna go up through this channel here for this one. So I'm gonna go up just 3. I'm gonna trim off the edge or the end, and then I'm gonna move on to the next one. For this one, I'm just gonna go in this channel right beside the previous one. And ideally, because of the way that this is woven, we shouldn't be seeing any of those ends from the front. You can see that, like, because we have this bulky weft, it kind of hides those ends really nicely. So now I can move on to this red one. Now some of the sections I'll be able to tuck them in more rows like this one. So I can go up through here and I can go as far as I want. And I would say these middle ones are a little bit more important because, again, over here, this little clamp is going to be on top of this section. So it's going to hold some of those ends in. You can always flip over your loom, make sure that you're not seeing the needle from the front. And then when you tuck in your ends, you don't want to do this. See how that immediately sucks that in because it's just too tight? So now I'm going to pull that back out a little bit, make sure it's nice and even, and then trim off the excess. So I'm going to do that with the rest of the ends, and then we're ready to get this off of the loom. Okay, the bracelet is done being woven. Now, I have an interesting way of finishing this. I've done it one time before and it did work. So I'm hopeful that it will work again. I had to literally watch my last video to remember how to do this. But what you want to do is you want to slip the loops off of the loom without cutting them. And then I'm grabbing one of the ends. So we had both of our warp strings where we tied it was on one end. I'm grabbing this first one and I'm actually gonna pull this through, and we're gonna stop when that loop just barely touches. So see there. So it's just pulled through that much. Then where do we go next? I think we go this way. And we're gonna pull the next string just till it's touching the edge. We don't wanna do that super tight or it's gonna like risk misshapening the bracelet. And then I'm gonna go back to the other end and pull the next string just till it touches, and then flip it around again. So you can see we're finishing this in a bit of a different way. I don't know how this would work or if it would work on something larger, but it works pretty well on a small bracelet like this. You just wanna go slow. Now going back to the other end, switching sides again. Okay, this one's getting caught up in this one. We don't want that. And then lastly, we're gonna pull on this end. Okay, so now that those are all pulled through, now we just only have these 2 warp strings to tuck in instead of all of the warp strings to tuck in. So I'm gonna cut some of this excess off, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and thread this up, and I'm gonna tuck it back into the piece. And I'm just gonna go way up one of these channels here, just so we know it won't come out. And I can do the same thing with the other string. And now I can go ahead and grab my little clamps. You're gonna need a couple of sets of needle nose pliers to do some of these next parts, but I'm gonna make sure I know this is the back, this is the front. I'm gonna put this over top, and if you want, you can add glue here as well if you're concerned about it sort of pulling apart. So just keep that in mind. You could totally glue this in, just a little bit of glue, hold it, and then clamp it down. But that's kind of what it'll look like once you have the clamp on, and I can do the same on the other side. I do think that this would be a little bit easier with some glue, but what I'm finding is working best is once you have the clamp kind of in place, to hold it so the clamp or the loop of the clamp is facing up, and clamp it from this direction. So now we have the bracelet with the clamps on each side, and now we can add the clasp. So I'm gonna be using one of these, I think it's called a lobster claw clasp. I'm gonna grab a jump ring. I have a few different sizes here. We'll go with this one because I have a lot of them. I'm gonna open up the jump ring, and then I'm gonna just slip this in there. So I've slipped the jump ring into the clasp, or the, what do you call that? Clamp. And now I'm gonna put the lobster claw on there as well. Okay, so now that that's, oh, and I just realized something. You actually need to add 2 jump rings, because see now how this clasp is facing sideways and we want it to face this way. So I actually need to add a second jump ring so that it faces the right way. So I'm just gonna take that off, grab another jump ring, close the first jump ring up, and then I'm gonna open this one. I'm gonna add the lobster claw and then close this jump ring. Now I have my clasp facing the correct way. So this is the back of the bracelet. So now I can kind of lay this on my hand or on my wrist, and I can see how much I'm gonna have to add on this end. So that's gonna be a few jump rings, or you could use some sort of chain. I know that that's something that is often added. I think I'm gonna do 3 jump rings attached to each other and see where that gets me. If I had a second, third hand, I could probably get this on. I think I'm just gonna add 1 more. Now I could have also attached a bunch of smaller jump rings. Like I said, this is kind of a learning for me as well, because I've only done this one other time and it was about 5 years ago. So there's a lot of learning when starting on something new like this. All right, it's all done. So let's have a look at the finished bracelet. So here it is. That was definitely more challenging than I thought it was gonna be, but if you enjoyed this video, check out this one next.